The thing that gets
We're
me
going to be
about
live in
stuff
just a
like
second.
this, okay. The thing that gets me about stuff like this is like they were planning to launch JWST. James Webb was an asshole, so I try not to say his name. JWST, they were planning to launch it 2021-ish.
Yeah.
They're going to launch it a decade late, and they were intending to use technologies that they expected to exist 20 years later that we still see as 20 years in the future.
Uh-huh.
And when something is always 20 years in the future, it's a bit more worrisome than when it's always 6 months in the future.
Are you like talking about like fusion? It's like
Yeah.
fusion. Um, hey everybody, don't forget to say hi in the chat. And then I will say your name. Uh, what was I gonna say?
I
There's
don't know.
actually the news has been picking up again. There's been a lot of really interesting news. Oh,
Yes.
did you hear that Starlink is going to go into a private beta test in 3 months and a public beta test in 6 months?
That is exciting. That means that they finally have enough up to get coverage to certain
Yeah,
parts of the world.
yeah. They just launched another batch yesterday, and so you can
Yeah.
think about. I mean, for those of us who live in fairly populous areas, like having to work from home is not a big deal because we just are connected to the internet. But when you think about the
Yeah.
people who say live in a more rural area and they are, and they have to stay home, they literally can't work from home. They can't connect to the internet. So now having this kind of remote access to the internet becomes pretty important. We're
Okay. And I'm
still
going to
mad, but yeah, let's get that internet working.
So since I have to stream, I'm going to do a desperate play. Keeper of Maps, if you're watching right now, CosmoQuest is down and rebooting it didn't seem to fix
Oh
it.
no,
Can you look at it while I record? I'm just going to keep getting text messages about it being down until it goes
your
up.
server just screaming.
Yeah.
I'm going to say hi to a bunch of people. Hi to Adam Synergy, Andrew Planet, Andy Cowley, Astro YYZ, Ben Kalo, Beth Johnson, Cherry, Chris Adams, Christian Barrett, Corey S., Cujo and Friends, David Mosscrop, DPI 209, Dustin Haskins, Elid Avron, Frank Tippin, G. Grindle, Gudrun Stadelbauer, Guido Bibra, Hello Galaxy Rise, Holly Mayer, Ian Farquharan, John Suffield, Johnny J, Kylie Cerna, Larry Beckham, Leonard Lindstrom, Magnus Timer Jensen, Mark Sheeran, MC Hall, Mrs. Nat, Mitzvah Golem, Nancy Graziano, Ocean McIntyre, Paul Disney, PsychoCat749, Raj Luthra, Rich Wilson, Arjone, Ron Hook, Susie Murph, and Thomas Traniker. Hey, everybody. Welcome.
And if Keeper isn't out there, can someone please track him down and beg him to please look at my server?
You hear the screaming,
Please.
the screaming.
Yes.
For those of you who are wondering what it is that you have stumbled into, this is going to be a live episode of Astronomy Cast, our long running episode, our long running podcast all about space and astronomy. Today it'll be episode 567, where we talk about repairing and refueling satellites, which is pretty cool. So we're going to record the show, and then we are going to stick around and we will answer your questions about space and or astronomy. Remember, you do not have to ask questions about that are directly related to the episode. You can ask your questions in the live chat in YouTube, questions over on Twitch, or you can ask them in the Slack. And if you're not already a member of the weekly Space Hangout crew, this is, of course, the community that does all the conversing behind the scenes. They're the executive producers of the weekly Space Hangout. You should go to wshcrew.space and we will hook you up.
CosmoQuest is up.
Yay!
It's up.
It
All
happened.
right. I feel so much better.
Good.
I don't
Is that
know.
were you going to be a little distracted during the show?
That was an understatement.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, allow me to answer that question, but first, allow me to obsess about the state of my web server. I know the
You've
worst.
been there. We've
Oh
like
yeah,
canceled episodes when Universe Today went down because CosmoQuest going down is sadness.
hmm
Universe Today going down is lost wages
lost
for
wages.
all the humans that
Yeah,
work there.
yeah. The worst that we've ever had. And I'm sure some people watching this remember this event. It was about 5 years ago. Amazon's EC2 cloud went
Yes.
down for like 3 days, 4 days,
Yeah. It
and
was
half the
horrible.
internet went down. and I happened to be university happened to be stored on that server when it was happening,
Oh
and so
no.
we just had day after day after day of
And you couldn't
no.
spin up in another network because of how you were set up. And you're set up differently now, I think.
Yeah, we're a little set. I mean, still, I mean, so I'm running off DigitalOcean now, and it's if I have backups that are off site, so if I had to, I could spin up a new server and deploy from a backup and have a new. But it's still such a total pain.
Yeah.
Like it's just, oh, it's misery. It's the worst feeling. So anyway, uh, I know how it sucks, and it goes down all the time. Like your servers go down, and you get these panicked phone calls from your web server or from the services that monitor your web server. Things break
Yeah.
all the time. Like that's just computers. They're the worst.
It's true. And yeah, we use Pingdom to monitor our server.
Yeah,
And so I get these text messages and it's like every 5 minutes that you're down is a new text message
yeah,
of why haven't you fixed this?
yeah,
That's not what they actually say, but that's how they feel.
yeah. And it's always so like even when I update, man. Okay, now we're going to the rabbit hole. But like when I update my WordPress, it'll
Oh
this
yeah,
the
that's
you
enough.
fix a you update one plugin and it'll put your site into maintenance mode, and then it'll forget
Yeah.
to pull itself back out of maintenance mode, and you have to go and you have to dig through your web server to figure out the right file to delete to make your
Yeah.
web server live to the public again. It's still such a fragile operation. I literally went back to get my degree in computer science so that I could operate my web server better.
It doesn't
It
help.
doesn't help. No, no, it's all still fragile. It's all still duct tape and baling wire all the time. And this is, everyone is existing on this infrastructure. And I don't, there's no way to make it better. So, anyway, maybe in 100 years
Yeah.
things will be a little more stable. But until then. Anyway, let's do a show. Let's talk about space and
Okay,
not about
we
web
can do that.
servers.
All right. All right. I'm ready to press record.
Press return. Okay, I'm also ready to press record.
Okay.
I have pressed
I
record.
Me too.
Hooray. Okay. Astronomy Cast, episode 567, When Satellites Need a House Call. Welcome to Astronomy Cast, our weekly facts-based journey through the cosmos, where we help you understand not only what we know, but how we know what we know. I'm Fraser Cain, publisher of Universe Today. With me, as always, Dr. Pamela Gay, senior scientist for the Planetary Science Institute and the director of CosmoQuest. Hey, Pamela, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Fraser?
Good. How are you responding now to the coronavirus? How are you changing your work? What's
So,
new?
I've worked purely from home for the past year. I've worked largely from home my entire career,
Yeah.
but I normally travel 50% of the time. And it turns out that all the time that I was putting into waiting for airplanes, going to airplanes, getting on airplanes, leaving airplanes, there's a lot of dead time in
No
there.
kidding.
And all of that time is now getting channeled into gardening and making my house clean. I
Right.
have found
You have a very big
objects.
house. Very complicated.
I
Yeah.
I forgot I owned stuff I'm now finding. Now, luckily there's nothing that I'm finding that I've like repurchased, but I have found a whole bunch of things where I've been like, it would be really cool if I had one of these. And I swore I had one.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I did. And now I'm finding them.
Right.
So many places.
It's weird for me. I don't know where my time is going. I it's because for me it's not much has changed because I
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
doing all that traveling. So the thing that's been different is I've felt less motivated to write episodes and do like original writing and more motivated to interview people. And so, because I've mentioned this before, everybody's trapped at home. I've been able to
Oh
get all
yeah.
of these astronauts and astronomers and stuff and interview them. And so, I've normally I would do one live interview on my channel a week. Now I'm able to do like three. I could do two a day. If there's so many amazing guests that are all trapped at home, looking to communicate their science. And so that's the biggest thing for me is like again, I always feel nervous, like I'm overwhelming people with too much, and yet we can see with Twitch that people can handle a tremendous
Yeah.
amount of especially intelligent, we hope, educational content. So, thanks to everybody who is putting up with me having fascinating conversations with really interesting people who are trapped at home. I'm having a lot of fun, and you get to come along for the ride.
And we need to give a shout out to all the creators out there who don't have kids at home and are recognizing that they have this superpower where they can leverage their time to help others. I'm watching Dustin Gibson, our
Yeah,
friend
he's been
at OPT.
streaming like a
You've been
maniac.
joining him period.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's been putting out a Instagram live every day at I
3.
think it's 7 p.m.
Yeah,
Eastern, and he's doing virtual star parties every
yep,
night. And he's just like
he's
a
beast.
powerhouse
Yeah,
of abilities.
yeah,
You're doing more interviews. We've added stuff on CosmoQuest.
yeah.
But all the rest of you are making us on CosmoQuest look sad because we're just like adding community coffee in the morning. So we're
Well,
sitting on the internet drinking coffee.
but you can see like there's a bottomless demand for
Yeah.
watching this kind of stuff now, which is great. I mean, it feels great to see everybody is working to educate themselves, working to learn new
Yes.
skills, working to learn new things. Like, even though this sucks and we're trapped in our houses, people are putting this time to good use. And I hope that even when the lockdown ends, people will continue to be as hungry for educational content. Speaking of educational content, space is really far away. So when you send a satellite out into the void, that's pretty much the last you're going to be able to work on it. And if anything goes wrong, too bad, you are out of satellite. But a new test has shown that it's possible to actually visit and fix a satellite in space. So maybe we don't have to throw them all away after all. All right, Pamela. So this is the. I think we need to, for people just to understand how far away, how remote, how difficult is it to actually go and attempt to repair a satellite right now. I mean, for the longest time, it was just thought it's impossible, can't be done,
Yeah.
don't bother.
So the distance, just stating the number really doesn't help because space is roughly, if you want to get to the cool stuff in low Earth orbit, you're only going 300 miles away.
Right, you
And
hop
let's
in your
face
car and you're
it,
there in a couple of hours, going
exactly.
straight up.
We've all at one point or another probably been subjected to a 300-mile long car ride. So the distance isn't the big deal, but the straight up part is the issue, and the how fast you have to get yourself going so that you don't come back down is an issue. So once you get to orbit, you don't have to just get there though if you want to do repairs. You have to get to space. You have to match the orbit of something else. And then you have to match the orbit near it so that it's not you're in the exact same orbit, but on the other side of the planet. You can do that. It's just not useful. But you have to match the orbit in the right place at the right time and then grab the thing without harming you or it.
Right.
It's that part.
Yeah.
The high speed chase around the planet.
Right. The 28,000 kilometers per hour trip around the planet is the part
Right.
that is the tricky part. And I mean, just on a tangent, right? People always ask, like, why don't we just catch all these satellites and do something with them? Well, it's like catching bullets. They're all moving in different directions at different speeds in different orbits. Each one is its own special individual, you know, delicate flower of a bullet moving at 28,000 kilometers per hour that has to be captured. And so up until this point, right, the idea has just been, yeah, okay, your satellite has broken down. Sucks to be you.
Exactly. And there's been a few exceptions. So the space shuttle, the good old grandpa's pickup truck of space flight, it was designed to haul things into space, track down the stuff that had a problem, pull it out of, well, not the back pasture, but the back orbit, bring it back down to Earth, fix things. But unfortunately, just 6 years after it really started doing its thing in 1986, in January of 1986, we lost the Challenger on liftoff. And in the assessment of what went wrong that took us to that point of losing one of these few orbiters that we had, it was realized that Grandpa's pickup truck just didn't work quite as well as we liked, and it really wasn't as reliable as we hoped. So while it could carry stuff to space, it wasn't as safe to bring it back down. And so the decision was made that post Challenger, we were no longer going to bring anything back to Earth.
Right.
But they still had that Canada arm,
Mm-hmm.
and they still had the ability to grab things and fix things. And so there were some pretty amazing missions. Solar Max was documented by an IMAX movie that you should be able to find somewhere on the internet. There were some tremendous efforts made to grab and fix some satellites early on. And of course, the Hubble Space Telescope is the most famous of the things that it grabbed and fixed.
And I mean, before they actually did that, and so when you think about how Hubble was built, the plan was you launch Hubble from a space shuttle, and then later on, a space shuttle flies up, they gobble up Hubble, bring it back to Earth, and then they repair it down on Earth. And so they never expected to try to do any of these repairs in space. It was all meant to be down in a nice lab on Earth where you had gravity and you had you could use intricate tools
The
and you could,
dexterity of your
yeah, the human
hands.
hand in regular Earth atmosphere, etc. And then when they made this rule, they're like, okay, great, we've got a broken telescope that it's wearing down and it's not going to last any longer. But we have this rule that we can't bring these things back to Earth, so we have to fix them. So how did they what did they do to be able to fix that incredible telescope?
Well, the first thing they had to do was figure out how to MacGyver things so that they could lock on to these servicing panels and reach through them uh, in ways that weren't really meant to have people in spacesuits reaching through. So they created various adapters. They had to create new tools, and they, oh my goodness, practice, because well, when you're dealing with service panels in puffy armed spacesuits, there's always the potential to shred your arm on the service panel
Yeah. And then
and
expose yourself, your atmosphere to
death.
space. Yeah.
Um, but after MacGyvering new connections, new tools, and new ways to get into things and practicing on physical duplicates here on Earth, they went out, they matched orbits with the Hubble, which is in a higher orbit than they really wanted to take the shuttle to after they realized its limitations. It's sort of like with Grandpa's pickup, where you like, it's probably okay to go into town, but you don't want to drive it all the way into the city.
Right.
With the space shuttle, LEO, getting to Mir, getting to the International Space Station, once that was built, those were fine. But Hubble is kind of at the top range of low Earth orbit. So they went to this higher orbit. They took that fabulous Canada arm, they matched velocities, and they grabbed and they brought back and they held that Hubble over the cargo bay of the space shuttle. And they worked slowly and methodically and they made the repairs. And one of the things that they worked on doing over time was figuring out how to basically make hot swappable components so that over the evolution of the spacecraft, as they recognized this is how we're going to have to
Hmm.
take care of Hubble, they made it so that each generation of astronauts kind of had a little easier of a go of it.
But also they were able to attempt to replace more complicated and more ambitious portions
Yes.
of the telescope. I mean, we always laugh about gyros and various stabilizing
Servos.
servos, etc. And of course, this was one of the big ones. When as these started to fail, Hubble lost its ability to point accurately, and the whole telescope wouldn't have been functional. And yet, they were able to swap out these fairly heavy machines designed to keep the spacecraft and install spare ones as well, not to mention being able to replace the actual instruments. And that I find that part really exciting, that you take this really old telescope, it's 30 years old pretty much like today, when we're recording this episode, and yet they were able to put in more modern CCDs, more modern electronics to bring the capabilities of the telescope and keep it current.
And Hubble was designed with the idea that these components, just like the lens of a camera, would be things that you could take off and put back on. This is normal in telescope design. Here on Earth, all of our big scopes are designed so that they have multiple instruments. And as you switch from one style observing run to another, you swap out what instruments that you're using, and it's a non-trivial process. So they figured out how to do all of this during the design process. But where it got trickstery is they use small screws.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
use sharp edges
Yeah.
because they planned to do it on Earth. Um, but they made it work, and they kept upgrading and upgrading and upgrading. And what is kind of poignant right now is, as amazing as all the human spaceflight development that we're seeing is, there's nothing that we're developing that will currently allow humans to go out and grab and fix the Hubble one more time.
Right.
And so our human option is dead in the water.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like Solar Max is going to be able to happen again. Right now, if something happens to get close enough to the International Space Station, maybe you can grab it, but you're not going to run down a satellite with the
Yeah.
ISS.
Right. And so then the focus, I mean, satellites are still breaking.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of tragic in the way that some of them break. I mean, you can have a satellite that is perfectly functional, doing a fantastic job, and it just happens to run out of fuel. And
Yes.
so, and we saw this with Spitzer. We saw this with, in the end, Kepler, even though Kepler died because of reaction wheels, but also it ran out of fuel. And we've seen this happen again and again. So humans can't do the repair, but maybe robots can.
And this is the really exciting part. And we started really talking about this as early as the mid 80s. In 88, 89, we already had template vehicles that were designed to go out and grab space junk. And grabbing space junk is a less sensitive project because if you bang around the solar panel on something that you're planning to deorbit, it's okay. No one's upset. But this idea of going out and grabbing hold of something has been around since the 80s. The technology has been prototyped since the 80s. But we are finally starting to launch vehicles. And by we, in this case, I mean Northrop Grumman is
Right.
finally starting to launch a vehicle that went out and it grabbed an Intelsat that was perfectly fine, but out of fuel. All of its hardware, all of its excuse me, all of its hardware, all of its software, everything was still functional. It just needed a friend to give it a lift. And this is where Northrop Grumman's satellite really stepped up the game of what is possible.
Yeah, and so this is a technology it's been around for a while. They're called the Mission Extension Vehicle, and this first one was MEV-1. And the goal with these is for them to have additional power systems, additional propellant on board, its own reaction wheels, etc. It will bolt on to an existing satellite that's run out of that propellant, and then be able to provide the ability to reorient, the ability to put it back into the right orbit, and to continue pointing it at wherever it's attempting to do its service. And so far, this first attempt seems to have worked well. It's given this satellite a new lease on life.
And they were originally planning to only be docked together for about 5 years. This is happening up at geostationary altitudes, so significantly higher up beyond the reach of anything that human beings have been even considering working at. And at geostationary orbits, it requires more energy to bring something down and burn it up in the atmosphere than it takes to boost it up into a higher parking orbit where it's not in danger of crashing into anything we like. So the plan originally was to dock together for about 5 years, then boost that Intelsat up to that parking orbit, the graveyard orbit, and leave it there. Well, right now, folks are so happy with what's going on that there's a good chance that the contract is going to be extended, assuming that Intelsat satellite continues to do its job well.
And so, based on this, NASA has actually been working on a whole set of technologies to attempt to maintain, refuel, satellites in orbit. And there's actually a bunch of gear attached to the outside of the International Space Station that they've been doing some experiments with, refueling, attempting to refuel test satellites and things like that. So what does the future hold? Where, I mean, they are still bullets that you're trying to catch, and so it's never going to be simple to refuel a satellite. But what does the future hold, do you think, for this?
Well, with the International Space Station, this is the robotic refueling mission. It really started to shine about a year ago in March of 2019. And this is a case of Dexter, one of the Canadian robot arms, grabbing satellites that are able to get themselves within grabbing distance of the International Space Station. Again, the ISS is not going to chase stuff
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
But if you have a satellite that's still fairly functional, still has that ability to maneuver itself around, and it can get itself to the ISS, we now have, well, not a fully functional refueling station, but the starts of construction of that gas station on orbit that, well, a lot of folks that have really hoped the ISS would be able to do earlier on. And if we can test things at ISS, and if we can get the Deep Space Gateway back on the drawing board for construction, I think it got yanked off last I
It's
looked.
off the timeline.
Artemis timeline.
Yeah, it's off the Artemis timeline, but it hasn't been canceled.
Okay. So, I mean, if we can get Deep Space Gateway going as a refueling construction station, this means there is no place in orbit between here and the moon that we can't feasibly direct a spacecraft to and make repairs and refuel it
Hmm.
with the potential of getting a human being out there with their fingers and thumbs doing the
Right.
things that human beings do next. And with Northrop Grumman's technology, we have the ability to reach things in all those intermediate orbits. Now, where it starts to get trickstery is when we start looking to the future and, well, what happens if like JWST doesn't open up all the way or something?
Right, right. Yeah, it's, whenever I do any episode about James Webb, people always want to ask, what if it doesn't work? And the chances of it not working are disturbingly high.
Hi.
It has dozens of different actuators that all have to move in concert. It has
Yeah.
hundreds of points that fold out. And when you think about like this, there's like a 5-layer mylar sun shield, all of the folding out of its main telescopic array, all of the mirrors, etc. It's tremendously complicated for the whole thing to come together properly. Just imagine if any one of those hinges fails and then the whole thing is non-functional. And it's out at the Earth Sun L2 Lagrange point,
Yeah.
never to be, you know, touched again.
There are over 300 single points of failure.
Yeah.
We attempt to build spacecraft without single points of failure. It's a goal. We usually don't succeed, but to have 300 single points of failure. And one of the things that at least a couple of months ago they were working on, I don't know if they're still working on it, is it was realized that a whole bunch of the bolts they used in constructing JWST were not the correct bolts. Someone just
Right.
grabbed the wrong
Yeah.
bolts, delivered the wrong bolts. The bolts were not up to spec.
Yeah. The
And they
wrong
can't
aluminum.
take the JWST apart and replace all the bolts with the correct bolts. So they're trying to figure out what they can and what they need to actually do. These are the things that
Yeah.
we're dealing with this particular spacecraft that now holds a dark spot in my heart.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there are no plans to repair James Webb, but the good news
Yeah.
is that right now, when the satellite is actually taken to the launch site and it's bolted up on the top of its upper stage, it uses an industry standard docking ring to essentially
Mm-hmm.
clamp on to the top stage of the rocket, and it has ports for refueling, and so they won't actually they won't fuel up the spacecraft until it's just about to launch, and so they'll attach these fuel attachments onto it. They'll fuel up James Webb, and then they'll disconnect all that, and then the whole thing will fly to space. So in theory, it's still going to have that docking ring. It's still going to have these fuel ports on board, and they're all fairly standard. So in theory, if this mission extension vehicle works well for now, maybe we'll see if we could see a future mission extension vehicle make the journey up to L2 and try to refuel James Webb. But there are no plans, so it's not impossible, but nobody is planning to do this, and definitely not with people.
And one of the frustrations that I have, one of the many frustrations that
Just
I
one
have,
of them.
is JWST was originally slated to launch somewhere around 2011. And when they put this together with these completely standard docking clamps, standard fueling capabilities, the thought was that about the same time that JWST ended of life, about 20 years later, they should be able to take a robot up to take care of it. Well, it's been delayed a lot. And our capacity to go to that particular orbit and accomplish that particular job is still about 20 years off. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all I've got.
Yeah, no, definitely. But then, of course, I mean, everyone talks about Starship. So who knows? Maybe there will be Starship will be capable of doing this kind of mission. Although we've seen now 3 prototypes get destroyed. So
Well, that doesn't worry me so much as its kind of design is really not so much suited. It's not designed to attach an arm to it. And when it
right.
comes to repairing spacecraft, you really need to be able to grapple on and, well, hug the thing you're trying to fix, or at least hold on to it so it can't
I'm
escape.
sure the Canadians are working on a Starship arm plan. So I think the other really fascinating idea that will move this whole thing forward is just this idea of on-orbit refueling, because right now all spacecraft are literally launched. Imagine you launch you get your car and it's got the fuel in the fuel tank, and that's all you will ever have. And when the fuel runs out in the fuel tank, you throw the car out. But in fact, a lot of people have been working on this idea of orbital refueling. The Starship mission to Mars depends on them being
Yes.
able to launch these starships, be able to refuel them in orbit, and be able to send them. So if you can refuel in space, how does that change things? If you can like have a spaceship run, do its mission, run out of fuel, go get refilled, what happens then?
Well, it changes the planned obsolescence that we have for so many of these missions. Right now, we take the approach of this self contained spacecraft has no hot swappable bits. And when it's done its job, it dies an almighty fiery death if it was in the right orbit, or it just gets parked if it's in a different
Yeah,
orbit.
or risks future space missions.
So this means that when we're building things like the Landsats, which have mission after mission after mission in the series, when we build the GOES series, these are weather satellites that were up somewhere around whatever number the letter R corresponds to at this point. With these series of missions, instead of planning that as soon as we launch this mission, we're on to building the next spacecraft, you instead build them and you think about them differently. You think about them with exchangeable bits. So, and here I mean pieces, not like memory bits, so that a spacecraft can essentially come up and grab out a console, replace it with a new camera, grab out a
Right.
console, replace the servos, and
Top
by
it up, give
build
it a top up of fuel. Yeah.
exactly. And so now instead of planned obsolescence of an entire spacecraft, you simply recognize that some things are going to get better with age. Cameras are going to get better with
Yes.
age. Some things will wear down. Servos, flywheels, all these spinny bits, they have a hard life. And if you can take those components that are destined to die and take those components that are destined to, well, get improved upon and build them in such a way that you can pop them out and stick in something new, that's going to save so much money as we just fundamentally change how we interact with our spacecraft.
Yeah, it's interesting. One Lockheed Martin was developing this program called ACES, and it was all about essentially orbital refueling. And so they were working out a system that would put a giant fuel depot in space,
Mm-hmm.
and they were willing to pay people to deliver just propellant to the depot. And so
Yeah.
suddenly these things turn into commodities where you're like, oh, it's worth $2,000 per kilogram to deliver hydrogen and oxygen fuel to this propellant depot. We'll pay you if you can do it. And then that starts to create a lot of downstream opportunity for people who are running smaller companies to be able to develop ways of maybe harvesting some of that from a comet or an asteroid and being able to deliver it. So that whole idea of just of refueling and refurbishment and reuse and accessing the resources from around the solar system is going to really be critical for us to be able to move on to the next stage. That's when you'll know, I think, that the real space age infrastructure is all starting to come together. So when you see that. Gas
And
stations.
it's an old dream.
Yeah.
One of the things that stabs me in the heart every time I think about it is I'm one of those kids that went to space camp. No one would have ever guessed, I know.
No.
And and when I went back in 88 when I was a middle schooler, I remember staring at the plans they had in the Space and Rocket Center for the future space station Freedom. This was before we went to the International Space Station
Yeah.
designs with the intermediate Mir step.
Yeah. The big one.
The big one.
Yeah.
And part of it was they actually had a space-based, it was a good old-fashioned hangar. And the idea was there would be astronauts doing the one thing that astronauts can still do better than any robot. And that's repair stuff with their dexterous hands.
Yeah.
And I remember standing there staring at that and talking to one of the adult leaders. These were actually college kids, but when you're in middle school, they're really adult. And back then they would tell us that by the time we were old enough to be astronauts, all this stuff would be built, all of this would be constructed, and instead of being the pioneers, we'd just be the users.
Right. Yeah.
And here I am now, the age of a typical astronaut. We don't have any of that stuff. I feel gypped. I don't just want my
soon.
rocket car, I want my space gas station.
Yeah, exactly.
Give
That's
me
when
my
you'll know. That's awesome, Pamela. So do you have any names for us this week?
I do. So we are supported by so many of you who go to our Patreon at patreon.com/astronomycast and become members of our community. And we have seen a notable drop in the past couple of months with COVID, and we know that a lot of you are hurting. And I just want to say, don't feel bad. Take care of yourself first. We're still going to be here on the other side. We'll find a way to keep going. We always do. But for those of you who are still able, thank you for all that you do to keep us going. So I'd like to say thank you to Jordan Young, Biri Gowan, Ramji Anamatu, Andrew Palestra, Brian Cagle, David Trogue, the Giant Nothing, Laura Kettleson, Robert Palasma, Corey Daval, Paul Jarman, Les Howard, Joss Cunningham, Adam Annis Brown, Emily Patterson, the infinitesimal ripple in space time, Ed, Gordon Dewis, and Kjartan Svari. Thank you. Thank you all for what you do.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye-bye.
And
again, that was
到了
just
2050
for
年
the podcast. We're just saving. We're not going anywhere. Save.
And then they saved.
Yep. That's what we do. All good?
Yeah. I'm going to play in the danger zone.
Oh no. What are you doing?
I'm going to just save the WAV file as opposed to saving the Audacity file and then exporting a WAV file.
I get that. That's I use Audition, and Audition just defaults to that, and
Yeah, now I'm going to just
it feels good.
Just be safe. Because that way you can rebuild it if you need to. Okay. All right, and I will upload that in a second. So
Okay.
we have not done an episode on in situ resource utilization, and I think that might be a good follow-up episode to
Yes.
this.
Yes.
Okay.
Message Susie and Nancy. Do it right now before we forget.
Are they watching? Susie, are you watching? ISRU. There you go. ISRU. There you go. I just messaged her. You all got to see it. All right. Okay. So Arjone asks, if a satellite had air-breathing ion engines, would it need to be refueled? So have you seen this technology? These air-breathing ion engines?
No.
No,
What
super
is
cool. It's a
what wait, why does an ion engine need to breathe?
oh, because it needs more propellant.
Okay, that was the information I was lacking. Okay.
So
Thank you.
right now you have an ion engine, and it uses xenon or
Hmm.
krypton as the propellant, and then it uses an electric field generated by solar panels to blast out these particles and give the spacecraft its acceleration. And so this idea, it's been tested by the European Space Agency. I forget who is doing it, but they have actually tested out an air breathing ion engine. So it has to be in the atmosphere, it has to be at a certain altitude. There's like a perfect balanced altitude where it's getting enough particles of atmosphere are coming into the spacecraft that it's able to hold them in a chamber, and then it's able to accelerate them back out using solar power. And
That's
so
cool.
and so the only thing that it's good for is station keeping, but that's very important. And right now,
Yes.
we use a tremendous amount of fuel or propellant for this International Space Station and things like that for station keeping. So, yeah, imagine you have a satellite that launches that has no propellant on board, and it gets its electricity from the sun, and then it uses that electricity to fire these ion engines that are blasting out particles of the atmosphere back out, and it continues to maintain its altitude at the same spot, essentially lasting forever, which is such a great idea, and it's been
Lasting
prototyped.
forever until something else goes terribly wrong.
Well, yeah, but one less thing to be destroyed.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah. You don't run out of propellant. That's pretty cool. I mean, right now, even the Starlink satellites have a 5-year lifespan or so, is what they're thinking before they run out of propellant and then they crash into
Yeah.
the.
And more have fallen out already than they
Yeah,
anticipated.
I think that 3 have gone down at this point, have failed. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this is, you got to break a few eggs to make an
Yep.
omelet. In this case, I don't know. They finished their 7th launch, so they're in the 400 plus satellites now. And I didn't see it. Chad said he saw a train just 2 days ago from that new launch, or just yesterday,
Wow.
last night. Yeah, he saw the train go by of the new launch of Starlinks. All right. Annie wants to know, Pamela, do you dislike James Webb more than you dislike pants?
I do indeed dislike JWST more than I dislike pants. And I really hate pants.
Now, is this because it's broken your heart and you really would like James Webb, but
Do you really want me to count the ways?
the the, the we're talking about the mission here. I mean, obviously not the guy. We're talking about the mission here, the telescope.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Tell us why you
Okay.
hate James Webb so much, you hater.
I I'm not an angel. I try, but I fail. So first of all, it forces me to say the name of a misogynist and a
Right. Yeah.
racist.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So let's just
yeah,
acknowledge that.
that's the part that we get it. You're not a fan of the guy, but the
Right.
telescope.
So JWST was something where everyone bought into we don't know how the F we're going to build this, but we want an 8-meter telescope out at L2 in infrared. So let's throw money at it. And if we throw enough money at it, we can completely innovate the technology and it's only going to take us 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
which is not true.
Right. As we near
And
10 billion and 20 years.
And so all the money, all the over budgetedness of JWST has had to come out of other places and people. And in August of 2018, I was told that my project might get canceled to have its funding go to
Right.
JWST. Now, I don't know if that's the reason my project was canceled, but I was warned my project might get canceled so that the money could go to
Right.
JWST because I was a nice big chunk of money, and that forced me to fire 45 people.
Right. And so the problem is that there's just this siphoning sound of all of the money going because James Webb is too big to fail. And so if
Exactly.
it requires an extra $1 billion, well, that $1 billion has got to come from somewhere. And for a small group of astronomers, this telescope is going to be precisely what they need to continue on with their theories. But
But
for the
there's only going to be a small group of
right,
astronomers left.
right, but for the vast majority who are thinking about things in terms of X-rays and other all kinds of different wavelengths and technologies and different searches, many other solutions could be
Would have
used,
worked.
yeah, to spend that money.
And so by going over budget for so many years, and I'm going to go over the why the timelines are an issue in a moment, but by going over budget by so much for so many years, it has sucked all the funding out of other projects. And so this means that things we're looking at 5-year, 10-year timelines for doing their projects, they just got
Yeah,
killed mid stride with no way to pick up and keep going other than to do their efforts for free. So thanks to the help of volunteers, I've been trying to keep CosmoQuest going without funding now for 2 years. And this hurts the soul. Now, the timeline part hurts the soul even more because when we build spacecrafts, we build them in a timeline so that we have this constant regeneration, rejuvenation to what we're able to do. So in the 80s, we started planning the Great Observatory series, where we had Hubble, Chandra, Fermi. I
Compton,
can't. You're right. It was Compton, not Chandra. It was
yeah,
Hubble,
Spitzer.
Compton, Spitzer, Herschel.
No,
There
Herschel's
was
year.
this.
It was Chandra,
I'm
Compton,
screwing this up.
Spitzer, and Hubble.
Okay. We had a suite of observatories I can no longer remember the
Right.
names of
Yeah.
that were designed to fill the electromagnetic spectrum with observing capabilities. And then we had all these other missions planned after that would step in and fill in the gaps. We had Fermi coming later, we had
Hmm.
Chandra coming later.
Yeah.
And like clockwork, they all stepped in to replace one another, fill in the gaps, and take on new science. And so today we have a bunch of spacecraft that we're expecting Hubble to be there, not Hubble, expecting JW to be there. So Spitzer end of life. We don't have an infrared observatory, and they kept Spitzer going
Hmm.
an extra 10 years basically. And this means TESS is up there. TESS was designed specifically to find things that would become targets of opportunity for JWST, and now they're trying to figure out how to do JWST from the ground with
Right.
massive ground based telescopes. And it's not the same thing. So now we have other space telescopes that are unable to succeed in their complete mission because there's no JWST there. So those missions will end of life before we ever
Hmm.
launch JWST.
So, I mean, where do you think that they like? Do you think that which part of it do you think they shouldn't have done? Because you know, I mean, I understand that we can be sort of armchair quarterbacks and say, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, they sure spent a lot of money and they sure went over budget. But it's hard as you're going into the process to know how it's going to go so wrong. And you're always dealing with the sunk cost fallacy where you're like, is this the time when we cancel the project? You know, we've already spent this much. We can't, people are right now are saying like, why don't they just cancel James Webb? I mean, it's done, it's built, it's
Yeah.
got a couple of bolts that need replacing, but it's really pretty much at this point ready to be shipped
They've
off to the
spent
launch facility.
at this point they've spent so much money that you don't cancel it, you take the risk on will it work or not,
Hmm.
because the launch costs are negligible compared to everything else.
Yeah, yeah, like it's done, it's done. So it's
They they took too big a step at once. It's like as an ice skater trying to go from doing a single axle to a quadruple without ever trying the triple.
But that, like, not being ambitious, like, I bristle at that.
There's
You're, like when
there's a
people,
difference between not being ambitious and being a dumbass.
well, sure, but I just like I mean, obviously, you don't want them to go over budget. Like it feels to me that
Yeah.
there is a balance. Okay, I mean, when we talk about computer software, when you go from a development standpoint, right? It's this idea of iterating quickly, that you
Mhm.
come up with the
Yes.
smallest possible version of what it is that you're trying to create, and then you iterate, right?
Hmm.
And and we know that creating these gigantic cathedrals from day one is always a recipe for disaster, that it'll never work, that instead you have to get the thing operational, flipping and flopping around and doing its thing, and then you add one feature at a time, continue to keep the whole thing operational until it fulfills some version of what it is that you want. And chances are it
Yeah.
doesn't follow the path that you expected.
Yeah.
But the problem with space is that it's really tough to build a thing, iterate. This whole episode was all about that, right? The fact that
But
it's
this
so
is what we do
tough.
with X-ray spacecraft. I mean, we have an X-ray spacecraft for 5 to 8 years. We launch a new one with
Hmm.
ever increasing abilities. We've seen the iteration. We've seen the iteration with the
Right.
Cosmic Microwave Background Explorers, where we went from Beppo, something I no longer remember, to WMAP to Planck.
Right.
This iterative design works. Now,
Right.
when they planned JWST, they knew that it was going to be a multi mirrored system. In 2000, when they were working out the details of all of this, we hadn't figured out how to do multi mirrors on the ground yet fully.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They took to, if you can't do shit on the ground, you don't try and do it in
Right. Yeah,
space.
I mean the first multi-mirror telescope, I think big scale one is like the large binocular telescope, right? That's the first big one that's
And,
operating right now. And then there's
and like, at the time they were doing this, I was trying to do my dissertation on the Hobby Eberly telescope, which was is a multi-mirrored telescope. And that sucker did not work. Like,
right.
we could stay in focus for 5 to 8 minutes.
Right.
Spec was all night long, no big
Right.
deal. And so to see people think that this was a good idea,
Right.
Keck had multi mirrors temporarily, and then they realized that was not where they wanted
Right.
to be.
And
But we,
so and so you would go like take the and I forget the exact size that Spitzer was. Herschel was bigger than Spitzer, and it was sort of a
exactly.
handoff back and forth from.
Yeah.
But so I mean, when we look at something, say LIGO, which you for the longest time were feeling quite nervous about how that was going to go
I was
down
a
that same.
curmudgeon.
Well, but I also think that you were sensing that it was going to go down that same path. But in
Yeah.
retrospect, I think you know, you were super wrong they they did a great job of iterating. They did the first version, they didn't detect anything. They took the machine apart, they made a bunch of upgrades, and then they came back and they made their detection. And then they've made a whole bunch of really interesting iterative steps on the whole system, and they've gone from one detection every year to one detection every month, every week now.
It's the 20 years before that I
Shh.
take umbrage
Sure,
with.
sure.
Again, they said back in the early 90s, like 93, 94, they were saying that before 2000, they'd be regularly detecting these suckers.
Sure. But right, and so the point being that if reality doesn't match your hope, then you keep iterating. You keep improving, replacing parts, coming up with a new method for doing quantum mechanical optical squeezing to be able
And
to improve the resolution while reducing the uncertainty and stuff. Like they've like all of the different, when you look at how they make, say, LIGO better in each iteration now, they're making 20 different improvements, each of which is going to give you a 1% here and a 5% there, which added up doubles the capability of the observatory.
And where I am still mad at
Yeah.
Ligo is they built all three US funded detectors full scale before they could prove that they had the necessary sensitivity.
Well, there's only
And now, in
two.
retrospect, the scientists are saying it was originally planned to be three.
Okay.
And they originally funded three and started construction on three.
Where's the third one going to be?
I don't remember
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but but the reason they set up with all three is they're like, we know how to do this. And what they really needed to do was develop the sensors first, build one of these
Mm-hmm.
tunnels. We've been practicing optical interferometry at the US Naval Observatory at Lowell for a long time, trying to get it perfected to
Yeah.
use at Keck and other facilities. And when they go and they full scale something on the first try because they think it's a neat idea, well, nowadays I'm hearing astronomers say, "Well, of course it didn't work until Europe turned theirs on. We knew it wouldn't." Well, F you if you knew it wouldn't work. That was billions of dollars
Mm-hmm.
and so many careers of postdocs who didn't get enough research papers, graduate students who didn't get enough research papers. When you build instruments that don't work, you're directly harming people's careers while removing money from the system that is also just meaning that you don't have careers.
Wow. Salty Pamela today.
I'm
Yeah.
really frustrated with the funding situation
Yeah.
in the
So,
United
I mean,
States.
and so when we look at some of the other options, like look at what the European Space Agency has done with LISA. They built a spacecraft, the LISA Pathfinder
Pathfinder.
mission,
Yeah.
designed to test out all of the hard stuff,
Yeah.
right? They said,
I'm a fan of that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. They said, we know that if this thing's going to work, it needs to be able to hold a test mass in the middle of at the middle of the spacecraft with this level of precision. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to do all of these other things. And then they built the one spacecraft, launched it, and said, yes, we were able to achieve all of these technical accomplishments. And in fact, we've got ideas on how to make them a little bit better for the next version. Then the thing crashes or, drifts away, but it's done its job. And so now you come
Exactly.
back around, you take another crack at it, this time with mountains of technical uncertainty washed away. And
And
that's
and this is exactly what they're doing with square kilometer array. They know they have a ton of technology to innovate.
right.
And so they now have Meerkat in South Africa that is producing tremendous research.
Right.
They're just starting to get research out of the Australian Pathfinders, the Murchison,
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
They Australia's acronyms aren't as good as
Yeah.
Meerkat.
Meerkat is the best acronym. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these pathfinders cost money, but they produce science. They show that it works. They build confidence. They identify the points of failure.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to pathfind the technology for JW.
Right. And when you do think about the pieces, like the multi-mirrored telescopes
Yeah.
is absolutely the future. Like there's no moving with single stage mirrors beyond a certain point. We will need these multi-stage mirrors down here on Earth and out there in space.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a thing that could be tested on its own. Send a multi-mirrored spacecraft with a 1 meter mirror, but
Exactly.
that it's using a whole bunch of
Have the
segments,
same number of
same
pieces.
number of pieces, but it is only 1 meter across. And then you work
Yeah.
out and then next mission, you send a 2 meter mirror and get really good at working out how these, so you could in theory break up this technical uncertainty into a bunch of different missions and say, we're going to test composite mirrors over here. We're going to test multi-layer cooling systems over there because this next
Yes.
level infrared observatory is going to require a sunshade or whatever, right? And you will be able to, and we're going to test coronagraphs over on this technology, and you can spread the technical uncertainty across the board, ideally in things that you can iterate more quickly. So it's a fascinating and topic. Obviously,
I
the
have
die
strong
the die
emotions.
is cast. We all just need to just wait and hope and watch and not cry if it fails.
I will get drunk and throw things if it fails.
I'm sure we're going to have a watch party, a launch party. All right, Pamela, we've reached the end of our hour. So what is coming up that people should be interested in?
We are next week going to be doing some interviews over on CosmoQuest with our daily space, which airs most Mondays through Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. We do a quick rundown of the news. And when there's stories where I want to know more, I hunt down the scientists and ask them questions and
Because they're all
ask
trapped at home and they all know how to use Zoom.
exactly. Exactly.
That's
So
awesome.
check it out. And if you don't have time to catch us live, everything is now going out as text on our with photos on our Instagram and daily dailyspace.org is where all the podcasts can be found.
Fantastic. On Monday, I'm going to be interviewing Das Valdez, who is one of the top streamers over on Twitch, about the work that he's doing to stay on top of everything that's happening in SpaceX. So, one of the best, really one of the best journalists, live streamers covering this new era in spaceflight. So I think you will enjoy that. That'll be on my YouTube channel on Monday. So thank you everyone for watching us today. Thanks to our moderators in the chat. We had a big audience today. So hello everyone to both on YouTube and on Twitch. We really appreciate you joining us. We hope you were entertained by Pamela's venting.
Crispy Fried Man is like, they spent that entire time on one question.
Yeah.
And Broken Symmetry is just like, well, in depth. Yes.
Exactly. That's how we feel. Sometimes we tackle questions quickly. Sometimes we just obsess. But we will see all of you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.